It's the week ending Friday the 1st of August, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the UK government announcing a timeline to recognise a Palestinian state, a major earthquake off the Russian coast sparking tsunami alerts across the Pacific, and an air traffic control outage causing havoc at UK airports. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the Week's digital team is Harriet Marsden, from the Week Junior senior editor Felicity Capon, and Jamie's on his hole. So stepping in today is my co-host from Today in History with the Retrospectors, Mr. Arion McNicoll. And Arion, you have just been flying between Australia and the UK and back again, so I imagine you've spent quite a lot of time in airports. How do you keep yourself amused when you're unaccountably delayed? I just listen to my children screaming for, minutes and minutes on end. I find that very therapeutic. No, they actually weren't that bad. We all escaped relatively unscathed, except for the fact that my facial hair mostly dropped off. Harriet, I imagine you're always flying club, so there's the buffet, right?
Oh God, I wish. You have a very high impression of my lifestyle there.
No, I was piercing the reality that we all know about your life there. Felicity, you're kicking things off. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Mirror, mirror on the wall, is an algorithm the fairest of them all?
We designed this model from scratch. We built her eye color, her hair color, her features. We pretty much designed her. The idea of an AI model is that if you have a brand, we can pretty much make a model that represents your brand. So she can be anything, really. For example, her name is Vivienne, by the way. So we name them, we give them a name. An AI model is not only the way she looks, it's also the way she is in her personality. So we think about is she feminine? Is she bold? Is she tall? What is she like? What is her personality?
Valentina Gonzalez, co-founder of Serafin Valora, an AI marketing agency, speaking on Wednesday to ITV's This Morning. Felicity, what's the story?
Well, the story is that Vogue's August edition is out now, and it features an advert from the fashion company Guess. But they have hired Serafin Valora and the two women behind it to feature an AI model in their advert. And it's the first time that Vogue has featured an AI model, although other editions of Vogue have already done this, and other fashion companies have already used AI models, including H&M. But it has caused quite a lot of controversy and a bit of a backlash from Vogue fans.
I mean, for people who are just listening to this and haven't seen the image, it is indistinguishable, isn't it, from a real-life model? That's the thing that I think's worth saying, Felicity. I looked at this picture and I would not have known that was an AI model were there not this fuss around it.
Yeah, I mean, she is tall, thin, blonde, blue eyes. She's white. She obviously has been trained on algorithms that are based on models on the runway, on the catwalk. So she's obviously based on humans. So yes, she looks very, very lifelike. She looks very real. And actually the only way until all this sort of broke out on the internet of knowing that she was AI was a very tiny little slip of disclaimer on the advert saying made by this company using AI. So it was the sort of very eagle-eyed fans who spotted that it was AI. But like you said, it would have been very hard to have known that she wasn't quite real had you not seen this.
Yes, and this has sparked an enormous debate. We might as well just plunge straight into it, Harriet. I suppose the principal argument for why this is a storm in the teacup is people will say, how is this different from using digitally altered photographs of a real model? You know, you're so tweaked with Photoshop these days. What difference does it make if you just dream someone up?
Yeah, I think that is a very legitimate argument that's being made. I suppose the counter to that argument would be that unlike traditional airbrushing or retouching, which that began with a real person, that did at least begin with a human and these AI models are sort of digitally created to look perfect. So there's no human flaws or inconsistencies or uniqueness whatsoever. There's also, it's not just about the model. It's also, there wasn't a need for a makeup artist, a lighting director, a photographer that might have been involved behind a shoot that originally featured a human model, even if it was then airbrushed or retouched later on. So there is a difference.
Yeah, but that difference, I suppose, Arion, is an economical advantage to Guess, isn't it? And that's another reason why you might say in its favour for the fashion industry. We don't need to spend so much money anymore.
I think so. And, Serif and Valora do elsewhere on their website and their Instagram handle, they make a virtue of the fact that you can buy into their services and you can bypass all of the expense of, location scouts and stylists and makeup artists and all of that. And so I think that's the side that personally I feel more sympathetic to, the fact that this is going to involve genuine job losses. The fashion industry had been so problematic for so long in terms of the imagery that it's been putting out there that I don't think this is anything more than one extra step of extrapolation along this long line of trying to create perfection out of sort of quasi-reality. And that's what we've got yet again. But I think, on the other level, the fact that people are going to lose jobs over this, and models as well, that is where maybe my sympathies lie the most.
Yeah, okay. So, right, we've tried to put the perspective of why this might be a good thing. Felicity, the arguments have been pretty intense. And I suppose the major argument actually isn't about job losses. It's women saying, this is what I'm supposed to look up to now, a woman that doesn't even exist. How can I possibly compete with a woman that doesn't exist?
Kind of, but I'm not sure I entirely buy that argument because, as we were just saying, you wouldn't really have known, would you, that it wasn't AI unless you had seen all this outrage. So I think what it is, I think people are more flummoxed and annoyed because I think they feel slightly duped and slightly tricked by finding out that it's not AI, which is the whole uncanny valley phenomenon of something that isn't real coming so close to the boundaries of what is real, and then finding out and feeling sort of tricked and feeling sort of duped. And the other thing I would say is that with unobtainable beauty standards, we already have all the issues and all the problems that come with that. Young girls and women seeing very, very beautiful photoshopped images and immediately wanting to have a cosmetic procedure or, getting a Ozempic or doing all these things you can do to make yourself as skinny and beautiful as possible, which are all really, really bad. We already have that. So it's hard to see why this AI image is going to plunge us into, further misery and further problems. I think it's more to do with the feeling duped that she's not real. And also, maybe it would actually help young girls if they knew it was AI and it was completely unrealistic. Would you not be like, oh, phew, okay, now I don't have to try and look like this person because this person literally doesn't exist?
Harriet, you're nodding.
The other argument about these AI models as well is not only can they reinforce these unrealistic beauty standards, but some people are arguing as well that they can reinforce issues around discrimination and bias. Because although the pair behind this company, they say that they tried to be more inclusive with the AI models, but that users don't engage with posts of women with different skin tones, and there's no response, and they are, ultimately a business. And Dove, the beauty company Dove, in last year, they did this ad campaign designed to show the biases in AI. So this image generator was asked to create the most beautiful woman in the world. And what it produced was obviously a young, thin, white woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. And those images don't look so dissimilar to the images of this Guess AI model as well. So there's that argument too.
I found it a curious argument that the people from Serafin Valora said that the images that they've done of AI models of different colours and ethnicities, etc., don't rank on Instagram, because of course that's an AI algorithm too, isn't it? It's not just about people pressing like. People don't get shown it because the Instagram algorithm isn't putting it out there. So, I mean, again, they are echoing this issue that is baked in. On the other hand, though, Arion, as Felicity was saying, and you're the father of a daughter, aren't you? Actually, if it were to be clearly labelled as AI, maybe that's better. Maybe it's just like, here's what these clothes could look like in a fantasy world we don't live in because this is an advert. In a way, that's simpler?
I think so. I mean, I struggle in a way to have too much sympathy for an entire industry that is peddling something and has long been peddling something that is obviously problematic for so long. You know, to me, this is just yet another example of a way that unrealistic beauty expectations are being sent to people. It doesn't really matter if the person, inverted commas, in question is real or fake. What we're seeing is something that looks unrealistic and unattainable in a way that is still meant to be aspirational. And I think that's why Vogue's involvement has become such an important aspect of this story. You know, they are the self-styled Supreme Court of fashion. This is meant to be where we see what fashion, like high fashion, represents and is all about. And so that's why it's notionally problematic that AI is in it. But I just think like Vogue has been a potential scourge on particularly young people, particularly young women for so long that this is just another example of it rather than an outlier.
Yeah, incidentally, on that, do any of you happen to know whether Vogue themselves actually knew that this advert contained AI when they agreed to publish it? Because I have noticed that there's been, as far as I can see, no comment about that. And I wonder if Guess just bought, 12 issues of inventory and just happened to fill it with this JPEG before Vogue even noticed. And now people are cancelling their subscriptions as a result.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that either. And I think it is really interesting point, because a lot of the headlines on this have been quite misleading, talking about Vogue models and linking it all to Vogue. And like you said, it's not Vogue editorial. This is an ad space bought by Guess, and it was Guess who commissioned the AI models. So it's hard to know whether... I mean, it would be very surprising, I think, if Vogue had let that slip under the radar and had this huge controversy spring up without its knowledge. But you're right in saying that this is it's a Guess model rather than anything to do with Vogue, really. They're just the magazine that's running it.
Although the one thing that really surprised me when I was reading about this story, actually, I didn't realise that it's not yet a legal requirement to label AI-generated content in the UK. But then I suppose there is also an argument, and I'm not saying that this is one that I would agree with, but there is an argument that given the issues we've outlined around the fashion industry and for models and how devastating it can be for models that are forced into this industry that doesn't allow them to gain any weight or has them taking diet pills or cosmetic procedures, and is incredibly damaging to the young women that come up through that industry, one could make the argument that use of AI models, at least sort of, there's no harm, no foul, right? With something that isn't real, with a girl on the picture that isn't real. She's not been subjected to any harm. Now, that's not an argument that I would make, but it is an argument that I have seen made. It just seems to me to be so out of step with what the public actually want. I mean, a recent poll by magazine app Readly found that almost half of British people want to see a more diverse range of body types represented among public figures, and nearly 2/3 want magazine images to look natural with no retouching or airbrushing. So given that the public seems to be crying out for real, authentic, relatable, diverse imagery, it is interesting to me that they chose to take this decision now in the context, in the moment we find ourselves.
But I'm not sure it's the public who read Vogue, is it? Like, Vogue is a very niche, high fashionista audience who I'm wondering whether actually they do still want this very traditional, very conservative beauty ideal. And I wonder whether more generally we're seeing a return to those kind of norms anyway. Like it made me think of the whole outrage over Sydney Sweeney for American Eagle. So she's just been modeling for the jeans company, and that's caused a massive upset because the tagline is Sydney Sweeney has great genes, which is obviously a play on words between jeans with a G and jeans with a J. And some people have said it's fascist and it's about eugenics because obviously she is another thin, white, blonde, blue-eyed model. But unless American Eagle just wanted the publicity, it seems surprising that, all these big brands still think that what their predominantly female viewers want, who are buying these jeans and reading these magazines, this is the kind of beauty that they're interested in. And except
these companies do make profit? I mean, Guess and American Eagle do. So, Felicity, despite what Harriet's saying about, you ask people and they say they want something,
Well, exactly.
What they say they want isn't necessarily where they put their money.
Yes, exactly. I think these companies, their number one priority is to make a profit. And either they are using Sydney Sweeney or this AI model who look remarkably similar, just to court publicity, or they're using these models because they know that their predominantly female readership is interested in seeing models who look this way. And I'd also question whether it is the responsibility of companies to promote diversity in the first place. They're there to make money, and that's off what their consumers want, right?
Yeah, ultimately, I mean, it is a business and they're all in it to make money. But there is a certain element, and Vogue in particular considers itself to be a dictator of taste as well as catering to taste. There is also an argument that there is a certain, it's not a responsibility of the fashion industry, but it is a reality that they do dictate taste and trend. It's also a reality that the so-called heroin chic look of extreme skinniness from the 90s is very much making a comeback in an era of Ozempic and weight loss injections. Body diversity and positivity is very much on the out, and thin, white, blonde, blue-eyed, not that it was ever really out, is very much in. But it's not true to say that they just cater to what their consumers want. They do also dictate what their consumers want to.
Felicity, do you think Guess will come to regret the backlash that this has provoked, or is this exactly the publicity storm that they wanted?
This is exactly the publicity storm that they wanted. I think they saw this coming a mile off. I think this was what they intended it to be. And I think we will see, I mean, all publicity is good publicity, right? And I think we'll see more AI models coming along before not too long.
Okay. Incidentally, if American Eagle do want more diversity, they should know that I'm wearing American Eagle underwear right now, and that would be different, wouldn't it? Can't imagine Vogue queuing up for that. After this, find out why what's happening in Vanuatu could be your fault. Okay, Arion, you're up next. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week we learnt that the planet may finally be getting its day in court.
I think I'm completely overjoyed with what the outcome of the opinion has been, and we're still trying to digest it. As someone said, we all might be in a state of shock at the moment with what the court has given us, and I think it sends a strong message for all of us and to young people everywhere that there is still hope. And there is a chance and there's a reason for us to keep fighting, because as we said, that this advisory opinion is a tool for climate justice, and boy has the ICJ given us a strong tool to carry on the fight for climate justice, and so we're very glad.
Activist Vishal Prasad speaking to reporters outside the International Court of Justice in The Hague on Wednesday last week. Arion, what's been happening this week? What's the story?
Yeah, so this week leaders across the Pacific have been celebrating after the International Court of Justice handed down its long-awaited advisory opinion on climate change last week, which is being called one of the most consequential rulings of our times, no less. The opinion basically said that nation states have binding obligations to act on climate change under international law, and that failing to do so could constitute, they said, a, quote, wrongful act. And that was generally hailed across the Pacific this week, not least among the nations that helped drive the issue all the way to the ICJ. One of the groups celebrating was the Pacific Islands Forum, whose Secretary General Barrena a few days ago called the opinion a major win for small island nations and predicted that it will galvanize climate-driven action across the region.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't going to download the full opinion of the ICJ, can you give us the ChatGPT summary, please? What did they actually say?
Yeah, so they basically declared that states have legal obligations to prevent climate harm and could face reparations if they don't. It was also a unanimous ruling, which was interesting in itself, though many of the judges have sort of gone on to own their, to add their own little tweaks and notes and tags and so on. But what the court said was that states, can be held responsible under international law for failing to act on climate change, particularly through fossil fuel production, consumption, and subsidies and licensing and so on. So, countries like Australia that say, well, we're just digging stuff up and then sending it overseas and we have no responsibility for the emissions that happen after the coal goes overseas, can no longer claim that. And simultaneously, island nations like Vanuatu or Samoa or, other small Pacific nations that are directly threatened by the impacts of climate change potentially have the opportunity to lead some sort of litigation of their own, though, that is a whole other big can of worms that's yet to be opened.
And how did this ruling come about? It was because of activists from some of those small nations, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was amazing. This group of very determined Pacific University law students played this incredibly pivotal role in bringing the case in the first place. They basically thought, well, look, the COP summits aren't getting us that far, so why don't we try to push along the potential for seeking an advisory opinion from the ICJ? And they convinced Vanuatu, as it happens, to lead the charge, and then it did make it all the way. It's been years in the making. They kicked it off in 2019, and it's only just emerged last week. So, it's been a long process. But yeah, it was led by this really small grassroots activist collective.
Felicity, I know you have an interest in climate stories, and your readers definitely do in the Week Junior as well, and you've been following this sort of thing for years. Do you think this is a significant moment?
I hope so. It's certainly being hailed by a lot of climate change lawyers and climate change activists as such. It depends really on how much weight you put on the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. So, for example, the US doesn't recognise the jurisprudence of this court, and this ruling will not be binding on the UK or any of the biggest fossil fuel emitters. Having said that, the judgments handed down by the ICJ do have a lot of weight behind them. They are treated with a lot of gravitas, and it certainly won't be something that can be easily swept under the carpet. But whether it will actually force the big fossil fuel emitters to do anything, particularly we have Trump in the White House, who is, rapidly unraveling everything that the Biden administration had put in place, that it's all drill, baby, drill. So it remains to be seen, really. But I did find it very moving, actually. The case had testimony from 100 countries on the front line of climate change. And there was a quote that really stayed with me, which was, Tuvalu will not go quietly into the rising seas. That's what its delegation told the court. So you got a glimpse into, the First Nations and countries and territories who are dealing with climate change right on the front line. And I thought that was very, very powerful. Whether it translates into action, it remains to be seen. And it really comes down to whether you think these big international organizations like the UN or the ICC or the ICJ or COP can do anything, when you have a lot of countries who don't really seem to care about climate change.
Well, it doesn't actually matter that this ruling isn't legally binding, and it doesn't actually matter whether or not you recognise the jurisprudence of the ICJ. What matters is that all of the current climate cases that are being heard around the world will be paying attention to this, and this will have an impact. This is a part of a broader picture of climate litigation. So litigation being a tool in the broader fight against the climate crisis. And we spoke about this on the podcast in March. We spoke about this in the context of a Peruvian farmer who took the German energy company GWE to court over climate emissions, although it had never operated in Peru. So the German courts rejected the case, but they set a really important precedent, which is that they established the legal principle of corporate climate liability. And this was very recently, and no other court had ever done it. So it doesn't necessarily matter about this non-legally binding ruling. What is true is that there are so many climate-related lawsuits ongoing around the world, brought by states and cities and countries, trying to hold companies to account for allegedly harming the climate with their greenhouse gas emissions. So for those companies, the litigation risk is growing, and investors will take note.
Yeah, I mean, the point is, Arion, that what they've looked at is not just what's going to come into effect in the future, but also retrospectively. Like, have countries been breaking the law in the past? They've looked at what the laws are. It's clarifying what existing laws are out there.
Yeah, exactly. And that is what the ICJ does. You know, the International Court of Justice, just in a nutshell, it's the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. It was established in 1945 and based in The Hague, in the Netherlands, and its main role is to settle legal disputes between states and to provide advisory opinions on legal questions that have been referred by UN bodies and specialized agencies. And that's what they have done here. I actually spoke to a friend of mine, Brendan Plant, who's an international lawyer and academic who served as counsel for Samoa during the ICJ proceedings, and he assisted in drafting Samoa's written pleadings as well as appearing and speaking during the oral hearings in December 2023. And he'd been really, really impressed that the court went so far with this opinion and felt that it had been, in his words, more courageous and muscular than many of the advisory opinions that the ICJ tends to have. But he emphasized really that this is the start of a wave of new litigation. I suppose that's exactly what Harriet's saying. You know, he said that the opinion, quote, clarifies standards. It's the starting gun on new waves of litigation, but it's pretty significant because of the clarity and, of course, because it was a unanimous opinion. So I think that's why this is being hailed as something that's so successful. It won't necessarily mean that Tuvalu gets billions of dollars out of the United States or Exxon or China or whatever, but it may actually help with some of these, like national and local and low-level law cases that are going on as we speak.
Yeah, that's interesting, that conflation that Arion just did there between, for example, China and Exxon. You know, you have states and you have private companies. Does this ruling mean that states are responsible for private companies who have been, mining for fossil fuels, etc.? Because I'm not sure that's always entirely fair. Obviously, some of them are state-owned, but some of them aren't.
So that's a really crucial point to make, actually, about this ruling, that it ruled that the liability was not just on the country for its own emissions, but also on the companies that are based there under their legal jurisdiction. So that's a really crucial point to make.
Felicity, would that be fair, if so?
I think a big sort of tripping up point in this is like the workability. And I think that's where a lot of the criticism has come from. So the idea of fairness feels quite nebulous, really, to get into. I mean, certainly it seems right that powerful countries who, have companies within their territory who are, responsible for this, that there is a shift towards helping the more vulnerable, low-lying countries. That is fair. But in terms of exactly how it's worked out, it does seem very difficult to work out where exactly responsibility lies and how much money. And I mean, there was something that kind of I found confusing about this, is that it seemed to generate a lot of articles where it was talking about reparations. And Jonathan Reynolds in this country, the business secretary, came out saying we shouldn't have to apologize for the Industrial Revolution, which kind of confused me because I didn't necessarily get from the ruling that this was about historic emissions. And I find the idea of reparations tricky, and I find that certainly unworkable. I find it very hard to suddenly start to have to calculate how much the UK would owe to whom for the Industrial Revolution, which also did a lot of really, really good things for the planet. So that kind of confused me. And just to go back to the workability point, I mean, a very big case in the US that has been 10 years going through the courts, and which the Week Junior was very interested in because it was brought by a group of 21 young people. That was Juliana versus the US. And that has now finally been dismissed this year after 10 years of going through the courts. Although in similar fashion to what we're hearing about this case, a lot of people are saying, well, actually, it has since been replicated in numerous lawsuits. It set up legal action across the country. And it was just remarkably brave to have these 21 young people go up against their government by saying, you're stealing our future from us. And it did have some successes. But on the other hand, the Justice Department, who I think had seen this case through like 3 different administrations or something, they also said it wasn't really something that the judges could rule on because it didn't have a workable remedy to the problem, and it was something that the government had to ultimately weigh in on.
But Arion, what's the point of paying reparations to a nation that might vanish into the sea anyway? I mean, crudely, they won't exist. So does it matter whether you pay the money? What they can do with the money? They can't rebuild it.
Well, actually, according to my friend Brendan, he said actually one of the really striking things about this ruling is that even if a country was to go completely underwater, it's still going to maintain, for example, its maritime rights. So there's going to be ongoing state-based entitlements that these countries actually have. And just picking up on that question about reparations, it's easy to see ourselves as the kind of the end point of this story, and that there might be reparations to pay for what's already happened. But I think the term reparations in this context is kind of talking about the decisions that are yet to be made from this moment that are going to potentially continue to exacerbate the problem. And so that could be, a country seeking monetary compensation or restoration of affected ecosystems, or, just international pressure for the emitter in question to reduce its carbon emissions. And I think that is the big story here, that this moment is a kind of line in the sand, and the court is saying, all of you countries around the world who think that you don't have responsibilities, you do. And this is us saying that, there are going to be bills coming your way potentially. And that's not necessarily in the context of the ICJ itself, as we've discussed, but it could be at different levels, including nationally.
In terms of Donald Trump, Harriet, he'll just ignore it anyway, won't he?
Unlike most things, this isn't necessarily to do with Donald Trump. I think when we're talking about the fairness, or we're talking about the workability, what we're ignoring actually is the social impact. So this is part of what some people call a broader nudge effect. So when you've got legal advisory opinions coming down in this way, and you've got court cases, and you've got science aligning with those, then social license really starts to kind of evaporate. And these companies, these high emitting companies, big oil and gas companies, start to become more socially unacceptable. And that actually does translate into money, because investors are going to take notice of this. Corporate directors will now have to assume that they have this litigation risk. Jeremy Leggett, who's an academic, and he founded a solar energy firm, and he was the first chairman of the Carbon Tracker Initiative think tank. I think that he put it really nicely. So he said, by confirming that states and firms may owe reparations, the ICJ ruling converts moral hazard into material balance sheet hazard. Because when you've got science saying carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions are bad, and then you've got legal bodies like the ICJ saying they're bad, that does mean that the companies who are being held responsible for those emissions become less socially acceptable.
I think it's worth pointing out that the advisory opinion came a day after the chief of the UN said that the fossil fuel industry was actually running out of road, because it's being undercut, I think, for the first time by cheaper renewable energy projects. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating, really, when you think about China, is there's already a massive shift under the way to greener energy, which I think is happening with or without this ICJ ruling, really, because, and it's more driven by national security concerns, because China doesn't have a lot of its own natural resources. They're very vulnerable to what's going on in the Middle East. And so they're massively ramping up their solar and their wind energy, and also exporting solar panels and turbines. And an incredible stat that 100 solar panels are put up every second in China. The race is on to define the future of energy. The shift is already underway. And even though I know what everyone's going to say, that China is still the world's biggest emitter of greenhouse gases, and we all just want more energy anyway across the globe. But there does seem to be happening a shift to greener energy anyway.
Okay. Up next, entertainment. What's more expensive than the Burj Khalifa and set to be the biggest media release ever? Find out after this. Okay, Harriet, you're ending the show this week. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This was the week we all got our heads in the game.
Radios, uniforms, C4, scuba gear, harnesses, cable trolley, and one safe-cracking robot.
So we're good, right?
We are good.
Let's get to Miami.
Wait. We gotta give this place one last sweep. We don't want to leave anything incriminating behind.
What the is that hissing?
A clip from the yet-to-be-released Grand Theft Auto 6 from Rockstar Games. Harriet, are you breathless with anticipation?
Well, I'm very interested. I have never played Grand Theft Auto. So for any mistakes that I'm about to make, I'm really sorry. Please don't Gamergate me. But I'm very excited about the idea of this being one of the most highly anticipated media releases of all time. This is Grand Theft Auto 6. Can
I say I played Grand Theft Auto 1 in 1997 on my PlayStation. That's my experience with Grand Theft Auto, so I have played it.
1997, I was 5.
I suspect my experiences are a little out of date now. The game's still the same, though, basically, right? You steal cars and drive them around.
One would suppose that it's not like broadly different in its premise, but the suggestion is that this game is going to cost $2 billion to make. So that would make it the most expensive video game of all time. And that is more than the construction of the Burj Khalifa skyscraper in Dubai, which was at the time the highest building in the world. So just to put that in context, there's a claim being made that this game is going to make $7.6 billion in its first 2 months. And the entire Hollywood movie industry makes about $7 billion a year in profit. So this is an extraordinarily huge cultural moment, whether or not you play the game.
But it's not happening this week. It's not happening till May next year. So what's happened this week? People are just disputing that figure, basically. Can it really make billions?
There is some dispute over this figure. So Grand Theft Auto 5 did make $1 billion in 3 days. And unquestionably, Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to top that because the video game industry has expanded so much since then. But getting to $7.6 billion in 2 months, if you assume that each game costs about $80, let's say, that would mean that Grand Theft Auto 6 would have to sell nearly 100 million copies in 2 months. And it took Grand Theft Auto 5 years to do that. So that figure is very much in dispute. But what is not in dispute is that it's going to be one of the biggest entertainment launches in history, not just among video games, but among all entertainment sectors. And Lewis Hamilton actually this week said that he would cancel all of his work when this video game comes out just so he can play it.
Yeah, I'm sure Formula One would have a view on that contractually. I mean, is it undermined, undersold, Arion, undercovered in the media as a whole? You hear this accusation a lot, don't you? The games industry is bigger than movies and music, so why are there loads of film and music reviews and hardly anything about gaming?
Yes and no. I sort of feel like there's enough media out there if it's the media that you want. Like there's no shortage of games review websites or, people across. Yeah, walkthroughs, Twitch streams, like everything. Yeah. Like you can ingest video games until your eyeballs bleed, and I'm sure that's what a lot of people do. But I think that Grand Theft Auto is a very particular shining star in the cosmos of video gaming generally, and I think that the attention that is focused on it and its release, and I think one of the other things that happened this week was there was a bit of uncertainty about whether that May date is going to slip again. Some commentators and supposed insiders seem to be saying that now May is going to be more like October. But yeah, I think that interest in even when it is going to come out, which is like approaching fervor, really highlights the fact that this is a massive deal. And as Harriet says, it's going to sell a lot of copies. Quite how many copies, we don't yet know. That's going to remain to be seen next May/October. So, we'll have to wait to see.
It's also a UK success, isn't it, Felicity? Which is, I think, something that is underplayed. I mean, people who know their games know that Grand Theft Auto originated in Dundee, but a lot of international players probably wouldn't be able to point to that on a map.
Yeah, it was Dundee. It was a very small and very scrappy. There's some great videos and articles on how we made it, but considering where it has got to today, its origins were very, very humble indeed. I mean, it has just stoked so many controversies over the years because of all the famous things. You can have sex with a prostitute and then you can kill the prostitute to get some of your money back. And that obviously provoked outrage. I think Brazil banned it outright. And I didn't realize this, but the publicist Max Clifford, he was the one who planted sensational stories about the game in the tabloids to try and ramp up its appeal. But I think it was also about freedom, right? It was a game where, I vaguely remember playing at university. It must have been a very early edition, but it was freedom. You could sort of play the game and go through the levels and do it properly, or you could just get in a really beautiful car and go off for a ride listening to the radio in a way that you wouldn't be able to afford that car in real life. So it's very, very clever. Another interesting thing is that the guys behind Grand Theft Auto also made Lemmings, which is a brilliant game.
Oh, it is a classic. Absolutely.
Love that game.
Yeah. Where is the $2 billion version of Lemmings? Because I would be buying an Xbox.
This is what the world wants and needs.
So, Harriet, yes, okay, it is a big deal, but why is it your story of the week?
I think that when we talk about the success of the gaming industry in the UK, I think we're really underplaying it. The entire video game industry is worth more than our domestic music and film industries combined. More than half the people in the UK game, 1 in 6 adults play regularly, and the sector supports 75,000 jobs. So we're the 4th largest exporter of games in the entire world, the biggest in Europe, and actually we're the 3rd biggest in the world if you kind of ignore the Cayman Islands, where some of the UK firms are domiciled for tax reasons. So this is something that affects absolutely everyone in the UK, but it is true that so little global media investment goes to the gaming industry, less than 5%, according to a recent report. And although you can find criticism and analysis of games everywhere online if you want to, it is true that most mainstream publications don't have dedicated gaming critics or reviewers. And there is a tendency towards kind of this intellectual snobbery towards video games. And the reason why it's my story of the week is that there is this enormous discrepancy with how successful the video gaming industry is, how profitable it is, and how many people play it versus how much attention and investment it gets, both from the government and from cultural criticism.
But can you say that about porn or gambling? And there are lots of things people do on their computers that don't get much attention in mainstream media because people think of it as just a leisure activity they do by themselves, effectively.
I think that's really doing a disservice to video games as a medium, because if you think about it, a video game encompasses film. It's also an interactive, immersive experience, encompasses graphic novels, art, music, television. There are more than 3.5 billion gamers worldwide. So this also every game crosses cultural boundaries and language divides. There's a physical element. So there's also a physical element as well as problem solving, intellectual stimulation. It's incredibly sociable as well. So what's really interesting...
Are you a gamer, Harriet? You're talking like you're a gamer.
I'm actually not, but I find it incredibly interesting that this whole social media ecosystem has grown around gamers. So platforms like Roblox and Discord and Twitch that are so central to young people's lives in particular, and that friendships are being formed around the world on these platforms directly around gaming. People are using these as dating sites. Like, this is an enormous cultural phenomenon that I think doesn't get the attention or the investment that it deserves.
Okay, but on government attention, just on that, I mean, actually, Arion, one of the reasons Britain has so many success stories is actually one of the things the Conservative government did do in 2010 is give a tax break to the gaming industry. I mean, that did happen in Britain.
That's right. The Video Games Tax Relief Scheme was introduced in 2014, basically to support the development of culturally British video games. It was intending to do so by allowing eligible companies to claim back up to 20% of production costs. But that these days is seen as helpful, but kind of outdated. Industry groups desperately want that modernized, potentially expanded or replaced with more generous relief and globally competitive schemes, crucially, that match incentives in places like Canada or Ireland. And I think there is this concern that without the kind of focus that we're talking about, if the government maintains this sort of benign disinterest, that the UK's position as this major entertainment powerhouse is going to slip. And I think that needs to be supported by so many things: increased public investments and grants, skill development and education support. You have to start right at the beginning to invest in university partnerships and visa pathways to ensure that people can actually come into the country and contribute to the British gaming industry. There's so many ways that the government can continue to support this industry if it cares about its economic bottom line. And of course it does. It wants to promote entrepreneurialism. And if it's serious about that, then it does need to pay attention in exactly the way that we're talking about.
Why have we ended up with just a few big blockbuster titles, though, Felicity? Why are these so expensive to make and relatively few and far between, these big franchise games that come out?
It's a good question. I mean, the question of why some of them are so eye-wateringly expensive, like 2 billion, is just, I can't really get my head around it. But then when you think that they are literally building entire universes, it is basically like a lot of the budgets are double what the biggest Hollywood films make. But then you're like, well, they are making big, Hollywood universes where you can just go roaming and traveling. And that takes lots and lots of staff, lots of time to make. So some of the companies employ hundreds, if not thousands of staff, and they take longer to make because there's such a big focus on graphical fidelity, I think it's called. So making it look really realistic. And some of the level of detail is just insane. Like I was reading about the designers behind Spider-Man 2, which made it so that skyscraper windows would reflect rays of sunlight, and getting all the textures right and all this sort of things, just mind-blowing. But realism comes at a cost. But I
Why is the dialogue so crap? I've never understood. I mean, it's been a while since I've dipped in, but when I look at games, I hear all this that everyone says, then I look at them like, if this was a film, this would be a B movie and it would be on telly and it would be bad. Why does everyone think this is good when it's in a game?
On the other hand, I think the success of The Last of Us, for example, so the TV adaptation, I don't think that there has been a lot of criticism of the dialogue in that. I think that was widely considered to be like a beautifully written TV adaptation of a game, using a lot of the same dialogue, a lot of the same characterizations, very, very, like, the realism was very focused on. It's incredibly detailed in that way. So yes, there are things like the Minecraft movie and Roblox and all of that becoming incredibly popular. But I don't think that there's going to be just as much variety among video games, if not more, than there will be in the film industry.
And also, just to defend video games and their dialogue for a second, there really are games like Assassin's Creed 2 or more recent, narrative masterpieces. They're often referred to as like Red Dead Redemption 2. There are these games that have incredible story arcs that take you over like multiple hours of play and standout performances. And then you have like little indie games like these, tiny little ones that have incredibly inventive settings or mechanics, or even sometimes emotive storylines that some of the bigger games don't take on. And I think that there is that real scope for the exploration of stories in a different way. I remember one of my friends, who actually was the games reviewer at the Times for a while, used to say that his children didn't really want to watch movies anymore because it wasn't an interactive experience, whereas games, like, they'd been raised so much on games that they expected to be able to interact with a storyline and drive it forward. And I think that that's a thing that, again, if we fail to properly maintain the industry, could be lost, especially as some of the big studios are suffering under the weight of this expectation. The big sort of AAA games are now kind of resting on sequels and remakes and all of that because it is so expensive to produce them, and lots of them are laying off staff. And I think there are real dangers if we lose either end of the industry, either the indie developers or the top level.
Well, when they bring back a sequel to The Secret of Monkey Island, that's when I'm dusting down my Xbox. My thanks to Arion, Harriet and Felicity. You can follow this show for free. You can get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts, and remember to tap follow. You can also watch us on YouTube and see our brand new virtual studio by searching The Week Unwrapped. You could just listen whilst you're gaming. And did you know, by the way, that whether you are watching or listening to this show, you can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine just for consuming it with a trial subscription. Go to theweek.com/subscriptions. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. And I'm off on my holster a couple of weeks. Arion will be here next week to host. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.